This isn't a happy story, I've got to tell you, but I'll try and start on a light note. How's this for a definition of irony? A hermit on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is asked for the true meaning of loneliness, and the only lifeline left is phone a friend. I'm a lonely person a lot of the time. Anyone else here tonight feel that way? Ever? I don't feel so lonely now, you know, and I hope you guys don't either. A beautiful thing is often something that someone else has expressed in a way that you wish you could have expressed yourself. Here are two of the most beautiful and heartbreaking things I've ever read, and they speak about how I have felt at times in my life. The Welsh authoress Dorothy Edwards, on the 6th of January 1934, she threw herself in front of a train near Caerphilly railway station. She left a suicide note stating, "I am killing myself because I have never sincerely loved any human being all my life. I have accepted kindness and friendship and even love without gratitude and given nothing in return." And then this, a man who lived 2.5 miles away from the Golden Gate Bridge. He jumped from it and killed himself. He had no family, and his doctor went to the man's flat to figure out if anything in the apartment may have contributed to his suicide. There was a note taped to the man's mirror. It read, "I am going to walk to the bridge. If one person smiles at me on the way, I will not jump." I'd like you to hold on to whatever emotions you're feeling right now. Suicide notes they were, but they somehow are comforting to me. I know what those people felt like. I had a lonely childhood. My parents divorced, and I ended up with a mum and a new father figure who despised me and who I despised. He was rich, and we lived for a while in an enormous mansion somewhere near Dorking with 24 acres of woods, swimming pools, bluebell woods, cottages, blah, blah, blah. Me, my brother and my sister lived in an annex of the mansion, essentially, with each of us having our own bedroom, and we were looked after mostly by a series of nannies, au pairs, and couples who'd come over from abroad, look after us for a few months or a year, and then they'd leave. And I began to understand that the people I trusted, loved, and could relate to would always, in the end, go away. I felt like I imagined other people didn't feel like me. I felt different and weird and unable to find my place. The defining moment of my childhood came when I was about 8 or 9 years old. I was in my bathroom, a windowless bathroom, sitting on the loo, and I remember looking at the latch on the door. I was always fascinated with locks and why they were needed to keep people in or out. I then saw a reel of cotton next to the mirror and had a eureka moment. I didn't feel wanted particularly or loved by anyone, just alone, and I hatched a plan to gain some power or something. I took maybe 4 inches of cotton off the reel, tied a loose knot around the handle of the latch, exited the bathroom, windowless remember, shut the door and pulled the cotton from the outside. The latch caught and locked. I then took a match and lit the cotton, which instantly burned away so that there would be no trace of what had occurred. A few hours passed. My sister asked me if my brother was in the loo. My brother asked me if my sister was in the loo. The au pairs couldn't figure it out, and Mum arrived. She could see the 3 kids in front of her, but the bathroom door was locked from the inside, but no one could be inside. My mum wasn't prone to swearing. Drat was her limit. I remember so vividly her looking at us, confused and angry, disbelieving, and yelling, "How the fuck has this happened?" I stood there like an angel. I had the biggest mental grin, and I remember thinking to myself, I did this, and I'm definitely going to get away with it. For the first time in my life, I felt good. Really, really good. I learned I could manipulate people for my own ends to feel better about myself. I haven't ever told my mum. And I won't. Secrets keep lonely people sane, I think. I went to school, boarding schools, where again I felt out of place and would do things to gain attention, any attention. I ate worms and jumped off walls and began to self-harm, putting pins into my arms and legs and cutting words into my arms and enjoying the sensation. I started to drink alcohol at the school bar. That's public school for you. And my favourite place at this school was an abandoned kind of bunker, a cesspit almost. It was a concrete rectangle built into the ground with a cogwheel to open and shut the two cement slabs to gain entry. I spent months in there, hours at a time, sitting in the dead leaves and wishing there was just me in the world, no one and nothing else to have to deal with. And then drugs to mitigate the sense of isolation. All drugs, any drugs, they didn't help much. And I went from drugs to crime, burglary. I don't know how many people are in here, but if any of you have been burgled, statistics say I probably did it, and for that I apologise. And from crime, I ended up homeless, essentially. I lived on the streets. I lived in hostels. I lived in temporary accommodation. When I was kicked out of those, I lived on the streets. About as lonely a person as I thought could exist. I was caught, of course, for burglary. I was a very bad burglar. The way I used to do it, weirdly, was with like celluloid. So I'd slip like Yale locks, and so that people had no idea that I'd been in, and I didn't mess things up. I just stole what I thought was going to get me money for heroin and crack, and then would shut the door again. And it's weird that it's kind of like the experience with the windowless bathroom. When I was in prison, a bad thing happened to me in prison. I can't talk about it here. Perhaps I'll never be able to talk about it. You can guess, and unfortunately, you'll be right. More shame, more guilt, the kind of demons that afflict the lonely. And when I left prison, there was a film crew waiting for me. My brother had arranged with a film producer he knew to create a film called, or a series of films called The Day That Changed My Life. And the day that was supposed to have changed my life was either the day I went into prison as a junkie, a heroin addict, a crack addict, a criminal, not a very nice person, or the day I left prison when I come out, some sort of clean, cherubic, wondrous person. Well, the film crew met me, and the first thing I said to them was, listen, we've just got to get to the pub. I mean, everybody who leaves prison has to have at least one drink. So they kind of sighed and said, okay, well, you can go to the pub, you can go and have a drink. I had a drink, and then got the taste for crack cocaine and heroin, and said, I'll tell you what, look, I'll see you in a couple of days. I'll definitely be back here. I returned to the place where the producer wanted to meet me to continue the film. Ruined on huge amounts of heroin and crack cocaine. She took one look at me, said, you haven't changed at all, and walked away. So that didn't do much for my self-confidence either. And I ended up going to live with my dad, and he didn't particularly want me there, but I had nowhere else to go. And I began using heroin regularly to mitigate the sense of isolation I felt from the world, and how I felt about myself, which wasn't very good. And I remember coming home one night. I'd been living there about 3 or 4 months, and I came home one night at about 11 o'clock, and all the lights were on in the house, and I noticed there was just like a duffel bag outside the front door, and I looked at this duffel bag, and there was a note attached to it, and it had been written by my stepmum, and it just said, we can't do it anymore. And as I stood there, each of the lights in the house just got turned off. And I walked away with the duffel bag. It had nothing really in it, and I was on my way to end my life. I was gonna jump from a car park, and as I was walking there, at about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, I walked past St. Pat's. I'm sure a number of people in here know it, but it's a place where vulnerable adults can go and live. It's a hostel essentially, and there was a worker who was standing outside having a cigarette, and she knew me a little bit, and she said to me, "Are you all right?" And for the first time in my life, I told the truth, and I said no. And she asked if I wanted to come in for a cup of tea, and she spent maybe 6, 7, 8 hours talking me out of what I was going to do and trying to provide support to me, and she saved my life essentially. Yeah, and loneliness comes in many forms as well. I was thinking about homelessness. I work with people who are vulnerably housed. Loneliness can come from drugs. I know that one. Mental health, I know that one. Immigration, and much else. Age as well. And it was lovely to hear what Muriel said. And what I'm going to do is read a couple of poems, because writing was one of the things that allowed me to express myself in a way that I didn't really do it for other people. I did it for me. But here's a poem about the loneliness of age, and if I can find it, it's about a cafe actually, 5 doors up, just on Trafalgar Street. You'll know it. The poem's called Broken Mugs. The Trafalgar Street Cafe is dying. A smattering of life is evident on the plates of the soon-to-be departed. My headphones remain clamped to my ears to shield me from the silence of age. Hands that, once upon a time, diffused bombs and sculpted lovers, now reduced to cheap cutlery. Gravy, ketchup, or both slip down almost every chin. I turn off my music. "It's very nice in here," I lie to the gentleman on my immediate left. "No," he says. "No, it isn't," and then returns to his hot pot, what I imagine will be his last meal on earth. I continued to take heroin for a long time, because I felt so different, so lonely, so isolated, so selfish, I just didn't feel like I imagine everybody in this room feels. I just felt odd, and drugs were the thing that stopped me from feeling odd. But they create this like, you know, this serpent that bites its own tail. Things only ever get worse and worse and worse, and the loneliness that I felt was often slightly different. Loneliness can be experienced by people who don't experience loneliness in a very, very different way. And I just want to check, there's no one in this room called Edward Mitchell, is there? No? Good. Ed Mitchell used to be like a Sky News reporter once upon a time, and he became alcohol dependent, and then came to Brighton, and I wrote this poem full of anger, resentment, and some rude words for which I kind of apologise. The poem's called, the headline, Ed Mitchell, loved by all, and this is composed in an Evening Argus rhyming couplet. The news sleeps uncomfortably on a bench by the Babylon lounge, and the column inches rise and rise as oily sentiment abounds. The news is alcohol dependent, you'd think he's the only one. He spoke to Thatcher, don't you know, he's journalism's erstwhile son. The news gets a spread in the Guardian. It follows the hack's inverse law. If you've read the news, then you make the news. It's like Jesus has landed next door. The news hangs around with 6 people. Their names and their souls are dismissed. After all, they never drove Volvos, nor were ever in a Daily Mail list. The news gets support from the readers of Brighton and Hove's local rag. For middle-class drunks, the middle-class cunts will hoist up the middle-class flag. The news is accepted as different and not like the others at all, for we care about him. What a terrible thing that he's taken so abject a fall from fame's distant grace. The news is the same as ever. Edward is not so unique. So for all those still sleeping on benches, here are some crumbs that I speak. I'm not doing too bad. Well, if you ask my work colleagues, they'll tell you I'm a rambling soul, and I've got about 3.5 minutes left, so I think I'm doing all right. Heroin, drugs were killing me, and I needed support. And I remember a guy who helped me come to get to detox. I was living in a flat that looked like a dirty bomb, full of syringes, heroin, raw meat, pizza, bed bugs, and fleas had exploded all over my flat. And he came round to me, to my flat before I was going to go to detox. I'd made a plan to go to detox, but I didn't know how to do it. And this guy came round to give me a bit of support. And he walked into my flat, and he didn't say anything except, "Tom, all I want you to do is I want you to take maybe 4 or 5 minutes in each of the rooms in this flat," and there are only 4: the kitchen, the lounge, the loo, and the bedroom, and all of them were appalling. And me and him stood there in silence for sort of 4 or 5 minutes in each room, and I looked around at what my life had become, who I had become, how ashamed I was of myself, the guilt that I felt. And 20 minutes of silence, just standing looking at that kind of stuff with someone that you don't really know, but who's been there, and this man had been where I had been. And at the end of the sort of 20 minutes just looking around this mess that my life had become, he looked at me and he said, "You know, Tom, you never ever have to live like this again." And I believed him, and I went to detox. I got detoxed off heroin and methadone and all the other shit I was taking. Went to rehab for 1 year and 3 days, or 1 year and 2 days. I learnt a lot about myself, what a selfish person I was essentially, how unkind I'd been to people, and I learned also that drug addicts are not necessarily bad people. I think I'm a good person that did some bad things, and you know, even this right here somehow feels redemptive, and I really hope it might help someone. I then went to university. I finished detox. It was the first thing in my life I'd actually completed. I went and did a psychology degree. I went to do it for no other reason than I wanted to understand myself. I wanted to understand why I was an addict. I wanted to understand why I behaved the way I did. And I learnt an awful lot about myself at university, and I passed the degree. One of the things I was proudest of, because I didn't do it on drugs. I just did it with hard work and dedication and belief, things that I'd never had before. I got the degree, then I had to find some work. I think I applied for 81 shitty marketing jobs that I had no intention of ever wanting to do, and then was employed by Just Life, a charity that supports vulnerably housed men and women, most of whom are lonely. Fact, you know, people, I counted 26 people in doorways between where I live on Montpelier Road and where they're lonely. And I wanted to help others. I wanted to be like the woman at St Pat's who had helped me, and the guy who'd stood in my flat and showed me that there was a different way. And I wanted to treat people the way that I wanted to be treated. And I must say that the work that I do, this is a shameless plug, but funding is diminishing in all areas, but charities as well. So remember the name Just Life, and if you feel that way inclined, then do so. Shameless plug, and I apologise for it. And I want to finish with one. I'm 49 minutes over, so I'll be about 2 minutes more. But I'll finish with this. The council asked me to write a poem about homeless people, and there was a big ceremony. 5 people. There was the mayor's personal assistant. There was myself. There was the woman for whom the writing teacher I'd been there. There was a tea lady and someone else who just happened to be in the room. And the poem is apparently in some room in the council that nobody ever goes into, you know, one of these grand rooms, but it's called The Pavement Apostle. I reside at the corners of your eyes, within a grand palace of apathy. I sit uncomfortably outside your heart, wishing its warmth would touch me. I walk amongst your nerves and skin, unnoticed, a regular type of nothing. I eat your waste products, solids, liquids, to stay alive and hope for something. I pray at your feet for hours every day, and all gods destroy me with indifference. I reside at the corners of your eyes, but it certainly isn't home. And I'll finish with this. I could tell you what a wanker David Cameron is. I could tell you how Jeremy Corbyn will save the world, but why not start small? Tomorrow, why not smile at someone you've never met before? You might just save their life.
Just yet, in case people don't.
Oh.
You sat on my notes. I mean, I feel like that's hard to listen to. I was standing there, so I couldn't really see what other people's reactions were. But for me, I find that hard to listen to, just because it's so real and raw. And when we set up Share Your Story, I guess we didn't really know what it would be or kind of what shape it would take, but one of the things that we want to do is just to be honest and make space to talk about things that are hard to talk about. So a massive thank you again for being honest and vulnerable. I can imagine that was a really hard thing to do. Going to do some Q&A, so it's difficult, isn't it? But if anyone's got any questions for Tom, then go for it.
Tom, thanks mate for being there for me.
Thanks for being here for me too.
Tom, do you employ some of the same things that were employed with you when you deal with some of the vulnerable adults that you work with? Do you stand in their flat and you ask them to look around? No. How much does it shape the way you behave?
Well, I mean, I know there are some agencies that say if you've been a substance misuser before, they ask you not to disclose that information. But I personally find it extremely useful. I found it difficult to listen to people who had gained their knowledge from books The guy who stood in my flat was a guy who had been in my position. The girl who at St. Pat's was a girl who had been in my position. She knew what it was like to, inject herself in the neck or all these ridiculous things that I did. She knew what it was like to burgle houses and feel guilty about it. And yeah, so I have no qualms about saying to people, I understand where you're coming from because I am you. I still have my addiction, is my addictions I have to deal with on a daily basis. I'm not cured of I'm afraid of using drugs every single day. I'm afraid of gambling every day. I'm afraid of, I have to be aware, and I think that the work, if I didn't do the work I do, I'd probably, return to something like that. I think the way that I support myself is by helping other people, and I think that that's one of the key things to loneliness. When I asked if people felt lonely, and people raised their hands, I talk to people on buses. Some people in here know. I walk up to people who speak foreign languages, and I ask them what the Lithuanian is for hedgehog, just so I can communicate with people. And I know that word in like 130 languages now because I speak to people. But there's no communication in the world. It's Twitter, it's Facebook. Nobody speaks to each other. Nobody, I think just a little bit of humanity and yeah. So yes, Ben, I do. It's the short answer.
Have you always written?
Yeah, always. Yeah, have I always written? And yeah, always. When I was a kid, and then in prison, primarily, I just needed a way to express myself. Yeah, I've always written, and I teach. I can teach creative writing, and I do. And if we're hoping to start a creative writing group within Just Life as well, because I said to a couple of people outside, it saved my life really. Writing is it's a good thing to do.
Really enjoy your writing. It's great. I was a little bit like, it's good to be open-minded, and this is a space for listening to everybody's words. But it was a relief that your writing was so good. It was. And then also, do you feel less lonely now? I mean, it might sound like a stupid question, but how's your loneliness meter?
Yeah, how's my loneliness? Do I feel lonely now? Yeah, I do. And weird, if you asked, I've got work colleagues and friends here, and if you ask them how they thought I felt most of the time, I guarantee you they'd say flamboyant, eccentric, ebullient, full of life, a go-getter. It's a mask most of the time. I feel exceptionally lonely, and I think loneliness is a feeling. I don't think it's, I don't think
it's part of the human condition.
Yeah, exactly, part of the human condition, and I'm always struggling late at night, thinking about, I don't know, I've got a beautiful girlfriend here who I love very much, and but does that stop me from feeling lonely? It doesn't. I don't know what will, but I do know that helping others is essentially the key for me.
Someone once told me ages ago that loneliness is because there's some people when you're asleep at night who are meant to keep watch over other people, and the loneliness that keeps them awake makes them able to do other things, so like a tribal thing.
Okay.
So like maybe you're conditioned to feel something from this, like not from the situation, but something that's built into you for reasons that you shouldn't maybe get rid of.
Well, thank you. I hope so.
I was just wondering, did you ever call the Samaritans in the past?
I didn't. I didn't. I don't know why I didn't. I just I wanted a solution, and I'm not saying the Samaritans provide a solution, no doubt. My solution was more heroin.
Right.
And I didn't, and in the end, I just thought I needed some sort of medical intervention to help me get off the thing that I knew was killing me, which was These drug use, essentially.
Yeah, I mention it just because I've recently been made aware of the Samaritans, and like it's a free phone number now, and that like anyone can call it like at any time, like 365 days a year, and yeah, they'll just like listen to you, like yeah, I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's give Tom a round of applause.